Good evening and welcome to Gravitas. I'm Palki, Sharma, Upadhyay. Let's get started. Two months back, India looked like it was winning the war against the pandemic. Then came the mutations and the complacency. Within weeks, India is seeing the worst surge in the world. More than 160,000 cases in a single day. The situation is dangerous. Vaccines are India's best bet, and the government is belatedly going into overdrive. It is fast-tracking approvals to foreign vaccines. Pfizer, Moderna, Novavax, you name it. Not the Chinese vaccines, thankfully, but most vaccines cleared by the top 5 regulators in the world will soon be available in India, and that will just be the start. Approving a vaccine, you see, is one thing. Acquiring it is another. The shortage is global. How soon can these companies supply to India? Will they make in India? How many weeks, if not months, will that take? What happens to the surge meanwhile? There are a lot of questions and newer problems like the mutating virus that evades your regular RT-PCR test. It's a worry. And we're not even talking about the super spreader events in India like election rallies and religious gatherings that are just multiplying the country's pandemic challenge. On Gravitas tonight, we'll discuss the new vaccine strategy and what India needs to do to flatten the curve. Also on the show, is it okay to fast during a pandemic? Is getting a jab permitted during Ramadan? WHO and religious leaders have issued guidelines for the holy month. We'll discuss. In Pakistan, protests surge over the arrest of a radical cleric. Hundreds of Sikh pilgrims from India are stranded. In the US, no end to racist attacks. This time, a cop confused a handgun with a taser and ended up killing a black man. His family does not buy the justification. And Japan has decided to release 1 million tons of contaminated water from the Fukushima nuclear disaster site. We'll tell you how the world is responding. We begin as always with Gravitas Global Headlines.
Federal health agencies in the United States have called for an immediate pause in the use of Johnson & Johnson's single-dose coronavirus vaccine after 6 recipients in the country developed blood clots within about 2 weeks of vaccination. Russia has accused the United States and other NATO countries of increasing their arms supplies to Ukraine and turning Ukraine into a powder keg. The Russian foreign minister warned American warships to stay clear of Crimea for quote-unquote their own good. Meanwhile, NATO has urged Moscow to end the military buildup near Ukraine. With a focus on the Indo-Pacific and maritime security, French Minister for Europe and Foreign Affairs Jean-Yves Le Drian held a meeting with India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar. The French minister is on a 4-day visit to India. Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov met Iranian President Hassan Rouhani and Foreign Minister Javad Zarif in Tehran on Tuesday. As per local reports, Lavrov and Zarif signed a cooperation agreement after the meeting. Lavrov's visit comes at a time when Iran has accused Israel of sabotaging its key Natanz nuclear site. Amid growing tensions with China, Taiwan has bolstered its naval prowess with a new amphibious warfare ship. The ship can be used to land troops and will bolster supply lines to vulnerable islands in the South China Sea. Europe has passed the grim milestone of 1 million coronavirus-related deaths. The region has witnessed a resurgence of the virus, with several countries witnessing record infections and deaths. There could be more trouble in store for big tech firms in the United States. A Republican senator has introduced a bill that would ban all mergers and acquisitions by any company with a market value greater than $100 billion. The new bill would effectively ban Apple, Microsoft, Amazon.com, Alphabet's Google and Facebook from any deals and would attempt to stop their platforms from favoring their own products over those of rivals. La Soufriere volcano spewed ash and hot gas early on Monday in the biggest explosive eruption yet since volcanic activity began on the eastern Caribbean island of St. Vincent last week. Roughly 16,000 people who live in communities close to the volcano have been evacuated under government orders. The European clay court season in men's tennis has begun in Monte Carlo, but world number 2 Daniil Medvedev has been forced to withdraw after testing positive for COVID-19. The Australian Open finalist was tested on Monday and has been moved into isolation. Rafael Nadal's participation has also been thrown into doubt as the Spaniard played a practice match against Medvedev before the Russians returned a positive test. Stephen Curry has created more history in the NBA by overtaking the great Wilt Chamberlain's all-time record of 17,783 points for the Golden State Warriors. Curry needed 19 points to surpass the mark and did it in the first quarter itself against the informed Denver Nuggets. He proceeded to rake up 50-plus points for the 9th time in his career, as the Warriors ran out comfortable 116-107 winners.
More than 161,000. That's the number of people who have tested positive in India in the last 24 hours. It's the highest daily tally in the world. Over the past week, India has averaged more than 130,000 cases in a day. Nearly all Indian states are showing a spike. It's the worst resurgence in the world. The situation is alarming. The solution is vaccines. India must ramp up vaccination. There are no two ways about it. They say desperate times call for desperate measures, and India is now taking a radically new approach to its vaccination strategy. Tonight on Gravitas, we are going to tell you about it in 10 quick questions and answers. Question number 1, what is India's new vaccine strategy? Fast-tracking the approval of foreign vaccines. How will they do it? Let's show you a list of global regulators. It's there on your screen now. We have the US Food and Drug Administration, the European Medicines Agency, the UK Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, Japan's Pharmaceuticals and Medical Devices Agency, and the World Health Organization. 5 regulators. And if a vaccine is approved by these regulators, it will be approved by India. Of course, conditions will apply. The vaccine makers will have to conduct bridging trials in India. What are these? Bridging trials are basically trials that will generate data about a vaccine in the Indian context. Why are they important? Because they help us understand how a vaccine will perform in Indian conditions on Indian patients. Earlier, the rule was this: bridging trials must be done before a vaccine gets permission in India. But now there's a change in that plan. 100 people will be given a new vaccine, any of these foreign vaccines, and they will be monitored for 7 days. And if they do not show any adverse reaction, the vaccine will be cleared for emergency use in India. This is the new plan, meaning the jab will be rolled out for the rest of the country. So the government has basically cut short the regulatory process in India. What does that mean for you? That's question number 2. Which vaccines will be available in India? Well, we already have 3. The Oxford AstraZeneca shot called Covishield, Bharat Biotech's vaccine called Covaxin, and Russia's Sputnik V. It was approved on Monday. Now, after today's decision, you will have access to imported vaccines from Pfizer, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax, and Moderna. Question number 3. What do we know about these vaccines? Well, Covishield, Covaxin and Sputnik V, they all have an efficacy of more than 70%. Sputnik has the best success rate, 91.6%. And all of these vaccines work on the same principle, basically. They are dead or weakened viruses. When injected in your body, they generate an immune response. That is how traditional vaccines work. What about the new vaccines that may be introduced? Johnson & Johnson is a single-shot vaccine. You don't need 2 shots. It has an efficacy of more than 66%, but America has halted its use today after reports of blood clots. Then we have the Novavax shot. Its efficacy is 90%. And then the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, they're different from the others because they work on the new mRNA technology. What does that mean? These vaccines do not have dead or weakened viruses. They have strands of genetic material. They basically teach our cells how to make a protein to trigger an immune response. They're fundamentally different, these 2 vaccines, Pfizer and Moderna. They have an efficacy of more than 90%. So this will be India's new vaccine basket. Which one should you pick? Discuss that with your doctor, we won't say. But whatever the efficiency of the vaccine, they're all 100% effective in preventing 2 things, hospitalization and death. So whatever you're getting, take it, we say. Question number 4, when will the vaccines be available? Well, Covishield and Covaxin are already in use in India, but they're short in supply. We don't know when Sputnik V will be available. The Russian Direct Investment Fund has deals with at least 6 companies in India. They will produce more than 850 million doses, but it's not clear how many of these doses will be sold in India, 850 million. Question number 5, from where will these vaccines come? Covaxin and Covishield, as I said, are being made in India. Sputnik is also going to be made in India. The others can be imported or locally produced if these companies strike deals with Indian manufacturers. Now, it is very important to note that most of these vaccine companies are struggling to meet their own domestic demands and fulfill their pre-orders. So it is going to take a while before they can start exporting to India. What about eligibility? Who can take the jab? Well, no changes in those rules. You can get vaccinated in India only if you're above the age of 45. Question 7. Who will pay for these vaccines? Right now, the central government procures vaccines and it gives them to states. India has allocated 35,000 crore rupees for Wuhan virus vaccines. The free vaccination drive is being funded through this budget. But private facilities charge for jabs. The cost is capped at 250 rupees per dose. That's almost $4. Question 8. How serious is the shortage in India? Well, the answer depends on who you ask. The central government says there's enough to go around. India has a stock of 24 million doses. Another 19 million are in the pipeline. This is what the health minister said last week. But states say that they're running out of vaccines. Let's give you the simple math. India is producing 70 million doses per month. India's daily vaccination rate is 3.5 million. That's more than 105 million shots a month. That is India's demand. So India needs 100 million doses, but it is producing only 70 million doses. Do you see the gap? That is the shortage. Question 9. Can more vaccines end the surge? Technically, yes. 2 countries have shown it. They have flattened the curve with vaccines. Israel and the United Kingdom, close to 50% of their populations have got at least 1 shot. India could replicate their success, but India will have to move fast to do that. The question is, how fast? That's question number 10. What is India's vaccination target? 300 million people by the month of August. How is India doing? Very good so far. Earlier this week, India became the fastest country in the world to administer more than 100 million doses. It took India 85 days to achieve this feat. In comparison, the US took 89 days to reach the 100 million mark and China took 102 days. So far, so good. But it's clearly not enough. India's second surge is a full-blown crisis. It must act urgently and effectively to curb the virus. And as India debates its strategy for the new wave of the Wuhan virus, here's a story that we must tell you. In January this year, as Christmas and New Year festivities came to an end, a new and more transmissible variant of the Wuhan virus led to a massive spike in infections in the UK. To suppress that surge, a third lockdown was imposed, one of the largest and most stringent lockdowns in the world. The movement of 56 million people was limited and a mass vaccination program was launched. 98 days on, infections, hospitalizations and deaths, they've all fallen. At least 60% of the adult population has received 1 vaccine dose. Britain is slowly unlocking. Restrictions are being eased. Prime Minister Boris Johnson plans to get a haircut finally. The people are enjoying their freedom. And how?
The mood is festive.
Oh, it feels great. Yeah, it's amazing. There's nothing like it.
The streets are packed.
Start a new world, baby.
So excited to be out on the street.
It's going to be a good time.
The stores are filled up.
Really nice. We were talking about it. We walked here, and it feels almost like London's coming back alive.
The pubs are buzzing.
Yeah, I'm definitely not going to take a pint for granted ever again. That's just going to always be like, yeah, that's going to be the thing.
Families have reunited.
Just feels like being released from a cage, basically. Seeing my boy again.
And the drinks are flowing.
Oh, brilliant. Worth the wait. Cheers.
After living under the most stringent restrictions, the people of the United Kingdom can't help but stay outdoors. In Birmingham, there are long queues outside luxury stores. People are keen to indulge in some retail therapy.
Oh, it's amazing. It almost feels strange to be here, actually. But it's nice, finally.
In Yorkshire, they are toasting to the easing of restrictions with early morning pints.
It's just fantastic because I haven't had one since Christmas Day. So this is my first beer this year, and I will carry on later on, I don't know, but it tastes fantastic.
And in London, they are savouring the chance to meet with some steak and laughter.
Yeah, we were excited to get out, yeah, at least anyway. It's nice to get out of the flat.
At the onset of 2021, the United Kingdom was going through one of Europe's worst Wuhan virus outbreaks. But thanks to timely measures, the situation is finally stabilizing. The infections have fallen by 2/3 since February. Gatherings of 10 people are now being permitted, and students above 8 years of age have returned to classrooms. Meanwhile, the vaccine rollout continues. 5.6 million people have been fully vaccinated, 32 million have had their first dose, and only 2,800 people are in hospital. According to estimates, by July 31st, most British citizens above 18 years of age will have received their first dose.
We were very confident about our vaccine supplies. This is always was going to be the second dose month, and people should come forward for their second doses, and the people who are called for in the 45 to 49 group should come forward and get theirs.
The vaccination program has helped, but Boris Johnson says it was the lockdown which did most of the work.
Yes, of course, the vaccination program has helped, but the bulk of the work in reducing the disease has been done by the lockdown.
As much of the world is bracing for yet another lockdown, the United Kingdom is returning to normalcy. But after so many false dawns, there is no guarantee that there would be no going back one more time.
So, as we unlock, the result will inevitably be that we will see more infection. Sadly, we will see more hospitalisation and deaths, and people have just got to understand that.
Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
This is the start.
An evolving enemy is the worst kind. Tried and tested methods may not work in their case. The Wuhan virus is one such evolving enemy. It has mutated thousands of times. Some of these mutations are more dangerous. They're difficult to trace. So what should we do? We must keep updating ourselves to tackle it. And mutations are proving to be the biggest challenge at the moment. They have been reported in the UK, South Africa, Brazil, the US, even in India. Earlier this year, India reported a case of double mutation. So why are these mutations, these variants important? Because they have supercharged the pandemic. In Brazil, the P1 variant is driving the surge in cases. In India, some experts say mutations are behind the massive second wave. So tracking these changes is very important. Remember the thumb rule of 2020, trace, test, quarantine. But tracing mutants is hard work. Your normal RT-PCR test is not working on them. In some cases, the mutants are escaping the test. So here's what happens. You get a test done and your result is negative, but you're actually infected with the virus. And you'll probably discover it when your condition is much worse. It's a very scary scenario. The US Food and Drug Administration has warned of this. Genetic variants could possibly mislead the RT-PCR test, your regular virus test. It's happening in India too and elsewhere in South Asia. So far, the RT-PCR was your best bet to detect the presence of a virus. Not anymore, it seems. The mutations pose a new challenge. So what is the workaround? Doctors will have to bank on their diagnostic chops. There are some classic COVID symptoms. The lungs, for example, they appear glassy in a CT scan. But not everyone should get a CT scan done, and even a CT scan can sometimes mislead. The foolproof method, we are told, is genome testing. What's that? It is finding the genetic code of the mutant. Unless we know this code, we will not be able to recognize the mutant, and so a test is not going to be able to detect it. So we must know what this mutant looks like for a test to discover it, to find it. We're basically operating in the dark right now. Going forward, genome sequencing must be our eyes and ears. Otherwise, even vaccines may not help. And I hate saying this because we spent most of last year praying for a vaccine. And as it turns out, the virus has a few tricks left. So we will have to up our game. The new variants are spreading faster. Are they also killing more people? Let's look at the numbers. This time last year versus right now. First, let's look at the daily caseload. This is what the last 5 days looked like. More than 746,000 cases were reported last Thursday, but by Monday, the numbers plateaued. 588,000 cases reported globally on Monday. What about the daily deaths? A similar picture. Last Thursday was a peak. More than 13,000 deaths were reported. On Monday, this came down to 8,800. Now, sample this. This sample, rather, is too small to draw trends, but projections have been made for as far as the 1st of August. This is one such model that is making projections, made by the Institute for Health, Metrics and Evaluation. What does this model say? At the current rate of vaccination and mutation, we could be looking at more than 4,730,000 deaths. That's if the current trends hold. But what if things get worse? In a worst-case scenario, global deaths could cross the 5 million mark. It is a nightmare scenario. But if everyone wears a mask and social distancing is strictly imposed, we can still save lives. A best-case scenario, unfortunately, looks like this: more than 4 million deaths. Let's face it, none of these scenarios are ideal. But that's where we're heading. Africa and Latin America are struggling with vaccination. Jabs are running out. Mutants are running riot. There is just one saving grace. Last year, the virus came out of nowhere. Most countries did not have the infrastructure to handle the cases, so serious infections inevitably led to death. In 2021, that should not be the case. We have added millions of hospital beds and thousands of intensive care units, so even patients with a mutant strain are surviving. The trend of 2021 is higher caseloads but fewer deaths. Remember the basic rules. They remain the same: masks, social distancing and sanitizing. Mutant or not, the sanitizer will get it. And vaccinate. Vaccinate like there's no tomorrow. Governments must pump more money into vaccine making, dispel all notions of vaccine hesitancy, and make herd immunity their #1 priority. The Wuhan virus is like a maths problem, a problem whose variables keep changing. So with the right planning, we can contain the surge. But what about the origins of the virus? That's a question we still haven't answered, we still haven't settled. And it's important to revisit the question because history notoriously repeats itself. If we don't fix it now, it will happen again. And that's something that the world can ill afford. So here's the question I've been asking for more than a year. Did the Wuhan virus come from a lab in China or a wet market in China? The World Health Organization, which launched a probe, does not have the answer. Instead, it has made an appeal. It is now urging countries to suspend the sale of live animals in food markets. Why now? And what does it even mean? Here's a report.
Wet markets. They could have launched this pandemic from China to the rest of the world. 1 year on, this Wuhan wet market remains barricaded and empty. The WHO team paid a visit to this market, nothing conclusive. Why is this place central to the pandemic story? Because the allegations of cover-up began here. The initial cluster of the virus was noticed here. There are clues staring the world in the face, but the WHO doesn't acknowledge them.
The decline in cases.
Instead, it issues an advisory. Shut down all such markets, the ones that sell live animals. The statement came on Tuesday. The World Health Body urging countries to suspend the sale of live animals in food markets. Why? Because the WHO believes they could be the source of emerging infectious diseases. It says everything, but stops short of linking this Chinese market with the Wuhan virus. The new WHO guidance says that animals, particularly wild animals, are the source of more than 70% of all emerging infectious diseases.
We issue hundreds of guidance since the beginning of COVID-19. So this is one of them. And it's also important to know that most emerging infectious diseases have their origin in wild animals. And suspending unsafe sale of live mammals for food will reduce the chances of a virus spillover in the future. This is not a new recommendation, but COVID-19 has brought new attention to this threat given the magnitude of its consequences.
Its investigators said the Wuhan virus probably emerged in bats first and it spread to humans through an intermediary. About 28% of the initial cases were linked to the Wuhan wet market. This market sold sika deer, badgers, bamboo rats, live crocodiles and other animals. 23% of the cases were tied to other markets in Wuhan. But with China withholding data, it's hard to prove they were the source of the pandemic. The WHO believes that banning the sale of animals in such markets could protect the health of people. It can only appeal though. There's no guarantee that member countries like China will comply. Remember, these wet markets were back in business last year in China. A Reuters correspondent paid a visit to one in Wuhan in December. Shoppers were lining up to buy live fish, frogs and turtles. There is enough medical research to prove these are breeding grounds for deadly viruses. Keeping them open is inviting another pandemic. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
It's the 13th of April and the first day of Ramzan for many Muslims in West Asia. In India and most of South Asia, it will begin on the 14th of April. That's after the crescent moon is sighted. Ramzan, as you know, is the most pious month for the Muslim community. The devotees observe a fast from dawn to dusk. But given the tough times we're living in, there are obviously some concerns and questions. Is fasting safe during a pandemic? Does taking a vaccine while fasting invalidate your roza or fast? And what about the Hajj? What are the new rules? Here's all you want to know.
Islam is based on 5 key practices known as pillars. The first is the profession of faith called Shahada. The second pillar is prayer, 5 times a day while facing the Mecca. The third pillar is charity, helping those in need. And the fifth and final pillar is the pilgrimage to Mecca, the holiest site in Islam. The last two pillars face an immense challenge in the current times. Both will be taking place once again during a pandemic. For a community of 1.8 billion people, there are bound to be concerns. Is intermittent fasting safe during a pandemic? In the month of Ramzan, Muslims who've crossed puberty abstain from food and water from sunrise to sunset. The purpose is physical and spiritual purification. But how safe is it with a virus on the prowl? In its Ramzan 2021 advisory, the WHO says there is no evidence to suggest that fasting can increase the risk of infection. Those suffering from persistence of symptoms after recovery can also fast. They've been advised to break it in case of aggravated symptoms. What about the vaccine? Does taking a vaccine while fasting invalidate your fast? The answer depends on who you ask or follow. Some hardline clerics are strictly opposed to vaccination during fasting, but a majority say it is permissible. From Saudi Arabia's highest cleric to the top religious leader in Lebanon and top Islamic bodies in Indonesia, they've all said that getting a jab is completely okay. They say since the vaccine is injected and not consumed, it does not constitute breaking the fast. As for the Hajj, Saudi Arabia has made vaccination a must for the pilgrimage, which begins in July. You will be allowed to enter Mecca if you have received 2 doses of vaccine. A single dose at least 14 days before the pilgrimage, or have recovered from the virus. The doubts have been cleared. The rules have been put in place. To ensure they work, the trick is to follow one of the most important lessons of Ramzan: patience and persistence. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
Meanwhile, in Pakistan, people are preparing for Ramzan. As unrest grips the entire country, supporters of a hardline Islamic cleric have blocked most major roads and highways. The protests are disrupting oxygen supply for Wuhan virus patients. And they've left Sikh pilgrims from India stranded in Wagah and Lahore. That's not all. The United Kingdom has declared Pakistan an undesirable and highly risky country. And if you happen to live in Pakistan, mocking army generals could indeed prove to be a highly risky proposition. Why? Here's a detailed report on all the 3 developments.
This man is Saad Rizvi, a 26-year-old Islamic cleric, and the current Amir of the Tehreek-e-Labbaik, Pakistan. In November last year, his father and the firebrand cleric Khadim Hussain Rizvi led massive demonstrations across Pakistan. The protests were against the publication of Prophet Muhammad's caricatures in France. Rizvi Sr. died of a cardiac arrest, and the protests died down. Rizvi Jr. tried reigniting his father's movement by demanding the expulsion of the French ambassador, Marc Barretti. But the TLP chief has been jailed. And to his delight, protests have once again broken out across Pakistan, from Rawalpindi to Gujranwala to Muzaffarabad and Lahore. Saad Hussain Rizvi's supporters have blocked all major roads and highways with one aim: cripple daily life in Pakistan. Their efforts are bearing fruit, but there's nothing to be proud of. In Lahore, the protests have disrupted critical oxygen supplies for Wuhan virus patients. And in Wagah, Indian Sikh pilgrims who crossed the border to celebrate Vaisakhi have been stranded, hundreds of them. New Delhi has conveyed its concerns to the Pak High Commission, seeking a safe return of all Indian pilgrims. But the protests are spiraling out of control.
Pakistani government has now decided to deal with the protesters from the right-wing radical party, the Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, to deal with them with an iron fist. And the government has decided to open all the roads, to clear all the roads and use force as well.
Timing of the unrest further adds to Islamabad's worries. Here's why. The United Kingdom has placed Pakistan on its list of undesirable 21 high-risk countries. Pakistan features on the list at number 15, slightly ahead of conflict-ridden nations like Syria, Uganda and Yemen. This list is essentially a travel ban list. It came into effect last Friday, causing chaos at Pakistani airports. What has Islamabad done about this? Nothing. It is busy silencing critics. The Pakistan National Assembly has passed a new bill. It aims to penalize anyone who criticizes the powerful army generals. The bill declares that any deliberate ridicule or insult against Pakistan army will not be tolerated. The critics could face 2 years of imprisonment or a fine of up to 2 lakh Pakistani rupees. The only saving grace is that the trial of such critics would be held in a civil court and not a military court. There are nationwide protests. They are disrupting daily life. There's global embarrassment in the form of travel bans. But Pakistan's priority right now is ensuring nobody mocks the army generals. Bureau Report, WION. World is One.
Now, most of us would like to forget the past year. It was full of hardships and loss. But the corporate world would probably disagree. For them, 2020 was a windfall year. CEOs got fatter paychecks. Companies booked abnormal profits. And all this while the world ran out of hospital beds and medicines. Nowhere is this more visible than in the United States, where capitalism and exploitation are often one and the same. Do you know how much American CEOs earned last year? $13.7 million. Let me put that number in pandemic perspective. A single CEO's salary in 2020 was worth 4 million shots of AstraZeneca's vaccine. 4 million. Compared to the previous year, their salaries rose 15%. Remember, this is during a year when the global economy contracted 4.4%. It really does defy logic. During layoff season, most CEOs took a pay cut, and they made sure that the world knew of their sacrifice. But here's something they will not tell you. Salaries make up just 10% of their remuneration. The rest comes from stock options and bonuses. By the end of 2020, vaccines were here and the stock markets rebounded. So these CEOs booked massive profits. At the same time, millions were slipping into unemployment. Same for startups. 2020 was a good year for them. And that golden run has extended into 2021. Last week was especially good here in India. In a space of 4 days, $6 billion startups have emerged in India. What many in the industry call unicorns. You see, startups with $1 billion evaluation are extremely rare. Hence the name, unicorns. In 2020, India produced 7 unicorns. In 2017, 6. But the last 4 days have been more productive than 2020 and 2019. Despite the lockdowns, India continued to produce more startups. 1,600 new ones were registered last year. And existing ones saw their evaluations explode. Paytm, it's now worth $16 billion. As we told you last week, Byju's is at $15 billion. Walmart is looking to value Flipkart at $35 billion. Startups entered the pandemic tentatively, but they're emerging from it as multi-billion-dollar entities. How exactly did this happen? 2020 was a year of crisis, and crisis, as we know, is where innovation thrives. Startups use the lockdowns to their advantage. The biggest example is Zoom. It became so popular that people were not video calling anymore. They were Zoom calling each other. If you look at India's new unicorns, the same trend persists. Among the 6 companies are a social commerce startup, a digital pharmacy, and a fintech provider. These startups were tailor-made for pandemic life. And it's obvious why India emerged as a favorite destination. Investors pumped in $11.8 billion into Indian startup market. This is nowhere close to what was invested in China and the US, but the trajectory suggests that India is on the ascendancy. So we have a strange situation where the economy crashed, but businesses thrived. Where companies slashed budgets, but CEOs enjoyed bonuses. How did this happen? The pandemic deepened existing inequalities. The corporate world was always unfair. 2020 just made the gap starker. When the supply chains failed, companies responded with cuts. They trimmed the workforce. Close to 25 million people lost their jobs. But the top bosses barely felt the pinch. They still had their stock options, their company resorts, and their customary trips to the golf course. So these trends should not come as a surprise. Corporates have always milked disasters. From building tanks for wars to vaccines for pandemics, the crises may change, but corporate playbooks do not. The United States, in the meantime, is in the grip of anti-racism protests. On Sunday, a black man was shot dead at a traffic stop. He was just a couple of miles from where George Floyd died last year. Was this another case of police brutality against African Americans? The protesters think so. So does the victim's family. But the police department says that the whole incident was a mistake. That the officer, and listen to this, the officer was going for her taser but ended up pulling her firearm. How plausible is this? And what does this say about the training standards in America? Our next report tells you.
16 weeks. That's all it takes to be a cop in Minneapolis. 16 weeks of training and you are out on the streets. A rookie officer with a gun in tow. It's a recipe for disaster. And on Sunday, we realized why. The officer shouts in disbelief after firing her gun. She was apparently going for her taser, instead ended up pulling out the handgun. A costly mistake.
As I watched the video and listened to the officer's commands, it is my belief that the officer had the intention to deploy their taser, but instead shot Mr. Wright with a single bullet. This appears to me, from what I viewed and the officer's reaction and distress immediately after, that this was an accidental discharge that resulted in the tragic death of Mr. Wright.
Even for the uninitiated, a taser and a handgun are worlds apart. This is what a taser looks like, almost like a toy, and nowhere near as heavy. It's a non-lethal weapon. Cops use it to electroshock unruly suspects. A handgun, on the other hand, is a lethal weapon. It is used to kill or maim suspects. The fact that a trained police officer could not tell them apart is unsettling.
It's not just a taser, just how to handle situations with any suspect. Okay, escalation of force and making sure that these officers are confident that the first thing they're not going to do is pull out their gun. They have other tools. Experience and training will help them control the situation with their command presence.
There were 3 officers on location that day, and 1 suspect. Dante Wright's death wasn't the worst-case scenario, it was the implausible scenario. But that's exactly how things played out. So, how common are such mistakes, and why do they happen? A 2012 report documented 9 cases going back to 2001, so it is rare, but not unheard of. Most officers carry their tasers on their weak side, so their dominant hand reaches for the taser first, and not their firearm. It is not clear whether the Minneapolis officer was following this rule, but for Dante Wright's family, The officer's explanation simply doesn't cut it.
My brother lost his life because they were trigger happy. Like, again, you know your left from your right. You know the difference between plastic and metal. We all know it. We know the difference in night and day.
Anti-racism protesters have hit the streets in Minnesota and Oregon. Smoke bombs and riot gear have returned, and echoes of Black Lives Matter are ringing again. The murder may indeed have been a mistake, but pulling up Daunte Wright wasn't. Casting him with force wasn't. Racism isn't America's mistake, it is the original sin. Bureau Report, WION. World is one.
Japan has decided to dump treated radioactive water into the Pacific Ocean. This water is from the Fukushima nuclear power plant, the one that was damaged by an earthquake and tsunami in 2011. The move has unsettled both the people of Japan and the governments of its neighbors. Here's a report on why Tokyo's assurances are not helping.
2 years from now, wastewater from these damaged reactors in Fukushima will be dumped into the ocean. More than 1 million tons of radioactive water is being stored here. It is inside a tank that can hold enough water to fill 500 Olympic-sized swimming pools. Japanese officials say they're running out of space, so they have no option but to release the water. They'll do it after a treatment process.
We will secure safety, which is far above the regulation standards, and the government as a whole will conduct exhaustive measures against harmful rumors. On these premises, we have judged that oceanic release is a realistic option and decided the basic policy.
Soon after that announcement from the Japanese Prime Minister, protests broke out, both in Tokyo and Fukushima. The decision to dump the water from the plants has been met with widespread criticism. From the local fishing community in Fukushima to environmental groups and citizens in general.
Such a decision is completely irresponsible. I don't think people with common sense will do such a thing. I think this decision is a terrible one without common sense. The person who made that decision cannot represent the public opinion of the Japanese people. We all feel very angry. Such a decision is really unwise. We hope that the governor of Fukushima will raise objections clearly. After the nuclear wastewater is discharged into the sea, will the fish in Fukushima still be edible?
Even Japan's neighbors are unhappy. South Korea says Japan's decision is totally unacceptable. China says the dumping of water from the reactors is extremely irresponsible.
Without re-establishing a safe means of managing this issue, without considering the opinions or the opposition domestically or internationally, and without fully consulting with the surrounding countries or international community, Japan made a unilateral decision to deal with the wastewater from the Fukushima nuclear plant by releasing it into the ocean.
Japan is still feeling the pain of the Fukushima disaster. The damaged nuclear plant will take decades to decommission. A vast swathe of land around it remains uninhabitable. Thousands of people still remain displaced. Since the tsunami in 2011, water used to cool the reactors and the contaminated groundwater has been stored here. Japan says there is no harm in releasing treated water into the ocean. The IAEA agrees. That's the International Atomic Energy Agency, which is ready to supervise the process. Clearly, the assurances aren't enough for the people and neighbors of Japan. Bureau Report, WION, World is One.
And finally tonight, we want to talk to you about Kashmir, the crown of India, often caught in conflicting narratives, often seen through political filters. One side says Kashmiris want to be fully and safely integrated with the rest of India. The other paints a picture of Kashmir simmering in discontent. Terror is used to hammer this narrative home. On one hand, videos show Kashmiris queuing up to join the Indian army. On the other, Kashmiris are seen pelting stones at Indian armed forces. Which one is true? Which is the real Kashmir? A bit of both perhaps, but Kashmir is in a state of flux. It is changing and it is important to map this change. I'll give you one example. Models walking down the ramp in Kashmir. Who could have imagined this a few years back? A fashion show in the valley. But you know, in the last 14 days, Kashmir has hosted not one but 2 fashion shows. It was a treat to the eyes, the revival of pluralism. Local models walking down the ramp, local designers showcasing their talent, dancers and artists fearlessly owning the stage. At least 500 guests attended the second fashion show. Among them were some big names from Bollywood. For Kashmiri artists, it was their stairway to Mumbai, India's maximum city, the home of Hindi cinema. The burst of opportunity and multiculturalism did not go down too well with some elements in the valley. So the second fashion show was accompanied by protests. It was also preceded by a terror attack. You see, whenever a positive story comes out of Kashmir, a negative one imminently follows. Because for some elements, it is important to highlight a grim picture of Kashmir. On the day of the second fashion show, a territorial army soldier was shot in the valley. His name was Mohammad Salim Akhun. He was on leave. He had gone home to visit his family, to meet his 6-year-old son, his 9-year-old daughter, to spend time with his wife. Terrorists attacked Akhun at his home and they killed him. And he was not the first soldier to be killed on leave. In 2020, Shakir Manzoor was killed on his way home. Manzoor too was a territorial army soldier. In June 2019, Manzoor Ahmad Beg was shot, again at his home. He too was a soldier on leave. Those watching us from India will be familiar with this name, Lieutenant Umar Fayaz. He was just 22 years old. He was abducted from a relative's home and killed. The young lieutenant was also on leave. As was a soldier called Aurangzeb, who too was killed the same year. Now, this is the story of the second narrative, the grim one. It is stitched together with the sole purpose of spreading fear, for quashing the dreams of the youth, and for harassing youngsters for daring to dream Bollywood, for killing local men in uniform in order to deter the youth from donning it. But do you know what? This strategy is not working anymore. Constructed fear has a limited shelf life. In Kashmir, it has expired. The people of Kashmir have decided to take control of their lives, to dream big. Kashmir today is a story of hope, where fashion shows are not called off because a bunch of followers of some conservative cleric chose to protest. Today, theatres are flourishing in Kashmir. The valley is being celebrated on social media like never before. Yes, there are still challenges. There is no denying that. But there's also a clear wave of change. And this change is immune to politics and threats. And we want to wrap on this note. We're leaving you as always with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.